Hey everyone, I'm Paul Grand, the CEO here at MedTech Innovator. Welcome to another of our MedTech Innovator live webinar series. We do these weekly in most cases. And this is the opportunity here at MedTech Innovator, which is the world's largest accelerator for medical technology, to bring our experts to you. You being some combination of the companies that are part of the MedTech Innovator Accelerator, or companies that are just out there watching this on YouTube. We're happy to have you here. That's the whole point, is we want to share the world's best resources with what we consider to be the world's best companies. That's part of our mission at MedTech Innovator. And so as part of this, we try to find the key topics, the things that you need to be thinking about. We want you to avoid mistakes. We want you to be doing things earlier than you might normally do them and be considering things so that you're ahead of the game. You know, what we don't want is situations which we see all the time where somebody says, God, I wish I knew about that a year ago or 2 years ago. I would have changed my product. I would have changed my strategy. And now it's, I just wasted 2 years, or maybe, it's going to cost you millions of dollars more or delay your product, whatever it might be. So that's what the series is all about. Today, we're going to be talking about really, really, really interesting topics that, again, these are some things that typically, people might say, oh, I'm so focused right now on my product. I got to get my product finished, or we got to get our product approved by the FDA, or we have to do this. I can't think about enterprise social good right now. I mean, I'm in healthcare. It's just by default, it's enterprise social good. Or diversity, equity, inclusion. Yeah, of course, that'll be something we want to do down the road when we have more time. Right now, we're just focused on our product. I can promise you these are things you should be thinking about right now. There's never a time that's too early to be thinking about either of these concepts. So we're going to talk about those today with our expert panelists. So with that, let me introduce them. First, I'm going to start with B. Bocalandro. B is an author of a fantastic book that I'm not finished with, I admit. I got about a third of the way into it, but I'm loving it so far, and I'm going to finish it after this. But B, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, about what you do, who some of your customers are for your service, and then also tell us a little about your book as well.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I love talking about myself. So I help companies with their corporate social responsibility or their societal contributions, and we are going to clarify terms in this webinar. So I work with companies like Toyota, PwC, FedEx, Eventbrite, a whole bunch of Fortune 500 companies, mostly a little bit further along than those of you on the call here. I also teach this at Georgetown University and at the University of Nevada, this being corporate social responsibility. And and as Paul said, I wrote a book. It's called Do Good at Work, and it's the book Paul was just talking about, and it's to help basically anybody in any job do good from that job. So it's kind of every worker's manual to the topic of today's webinar.
Excellent. That is a great intro. So we'll dig into more in a little bit, B, but thank you for being here. And that user manual, as I said, I highly recommend. And I paid for it. You're not paying me to say that. All right, let's move on then to Michael Cook. Mike is VP of Social and Environmental Responsibility at Jabil, who, as many of you know, is the world's largest manufacturer of medical technology. So I'd love to hear more about what you do in this role at Jabil, Mike.
Hi. Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to be here. And I have to say, first of all, I've only been in Jabil for a year, so I'm still learning a little bit about Jabil. But it is a very large manufacturing services company. And within that company has a very large business, as Paul says, in medical technology and regulated industries similar to the medical industry as well. My role there is really looking after I'd like to say the soul of the company, but that's probably a little bit more than I can attribute to myself. But it's really trying to ensure that we are doing the right thing today and tomorrow and in the future as well. And to do that, I look after the sustainability agenda. That includes human rights, social responsibility, also environmental health and safety, well-being of people, and the health of the people there as well. So it's quite a broad remit, but it's at the heart of what we are. It's the people, and getting those engaged in those things, and wanting to work and make Jabil a success.
Excellent. Good. Well, thanks for that context, Mike. I know that as I said, from only the bit that I know from what I've read so far, I understand how this can really be a huge driver, not just for your organization, but for the individuals within it. And that makes the whole thing work. So let me start off first with kind of, these terms, as you said before. Let's get to some definitions. On what is ESG, and let's start with that, and then we'll get into DEI. But let's start with ESG, and I know you've used another terminology for it too. So let's start there, and Michael, you can chime in.
I'm so ready for this question because I get it a lot. And one time I was at a corporate board committee meeting. This was the committee that was in charge of governance and corporate social responsibility. And they said, B, we are so confused. What are all these terms? So I asked them to write down on stickies all the terms that they had heard that they thought related to this. So let me share what they wrote on the sticky. So they wrote corporate social responsibility. They wrote environment, social governance. And if I don't bring one up, feel free to put it in the chat. Purpose-driven business, another term. Triple bottom line, another term. Conscious capitalism, another term. Sustainability. There's probably others, if I see any in chat. So we in this field have confused everybody. We have confused ourselves, frankly. So when I put all these stickies up on the wall, and I looked at them and I thought, well, how the heck am I going to explain all these? There are, these are board members. They're not interested in a half an hour discussion on the subtle differences. So here's how they all come together. They all refer to the same peak. And if you look at the business environment, what's happened is over time, everybody has been visionaries, really, I should say first, have seen the same peak, but they're coming at it from a different angle. So if you're like a more from an accounting angle, you might call it triple bottom line. If you are more into leadership, you might call it purpose-driven leadership because you're interested in what drives followers. But like all great truths probably, it emerged from all these different areas. But the peak is the same thing, okay? So there are some subtle differences, but really the peak is the same thing. So what is that peak, that CSR? What's the definition of CSR, ESG, and all of that? So the definition is don't aggravate societal issues. But wait, that's not enough any longer. It's actually don't aggravate societal issues and do help solve, assuage, whatever you want to say, the ones that are close to you. So that's what CSR is. That's what ESG is. Now, DEI is one component that fits into this. So that's how I would define this.
Okay, that's a good starting point. Thank you. And we're going to get more into that peak and all those things. So, Mike, you want to add anything to this from your end?
It's very difficult, actually. I need to get some things to show up. Wasn't prepared well enough, I don't think. Yeah. But no, I think he's really given a very good definition, which is that there isn't a good definition because everybody's coming in from a slightly different point of view. But what I'd add to that really is that it's thinking not just about today; it's also thinking about tomorrow. And it doesn't really matter where you come from. If you think about your profits for tomorrow, if you think about how your team's going to be motivated for tomorrow, if you're thinking about how your customers are going to be pleased tomorrow, you're probably in the right direction in terms of thinking a little bit more sustainable than if you're just thinking about today.
All right. So
I added for tomorrow.
For tomorrow. Oh, good. That's great.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Well, let's talk about tomorrow a little bit. In terms of table stakes, right? What are the table stakes today for ESG and DEI? Meaning, like, what do people have to have just to be in the game?
Yeah. So and that's why I love that Mike brought up tomorrow, because this is an edge that is moving, right? And so what is considered kind of radical corporate social responsibility, now is going to be a mainstream business practice tomorrow. I don't know if that is, some of them is going to be in like 6 months and others will take longer. But, in the 1930s, when the Golden Gate Bridge was built, the lead engineer, Strauss, he brought in hard hats and a net so that, workers wouldn't fall to their death. And people were like, oh my God, that's radical. Like, wow, he really cares about their workers. I mean, clearly hard hats are not all that socially responsible now at a work site. That's just doing business. So I think the two parts of like corporate social responsibility that have gone mainstream, I think, or are just in the process of doing that are table stakes are the environment. So a lot of us still think, okay, the environmental, that's for like these radical companies out there, but that's not true. It's now table stakes. And the second one is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this isn't kind of the flavor of the year. I think that one is also there to stay. So if you don't pay any attention to corporate social responsibility, I think you still need to pay attention to those two areas.
All right. And Mike, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I certainly think that the agenda is not as constrained as it was before, because I think the environment is a key part of it, but a lot of people think it's perhaps the only part, unless you look at the social. If you've got CSR, you think about the social part. But they intertwine a lot, because if you're working in the community, and Jabil has some very big sites, actually, with 60,000 people or so, we are a big town and have a big impact on the community, then these things really start interlinking very much together in terms of community, social, environmental stuff. But even if you're in the digital world, I mean, one of the things I think people may think, oh, I'm just in software, therefore there's no environmental impact. What is very interesting data is to see that data now is costing a lot of energy and therefore a lot of carbon around the world. And data centers account for more energy today than the whole of the UK uses in a year, and that's growing quite a lot as well. So the thinking, it has to go beyond perhaps just the first step. We have to think a bit further about how we impact either society or the environment and those things. Talking about DE&I, though, I think that is something that has been sort of bubbling around for some time, but is really now coming more to the fore. And I think the reason it is actually is because there's so much evidence to show that it's good business. And really, all of these things are good business. And I think that's one of the things that we can see is that it's not necessarily a cost. Of course, there may be some costs, but there are lots of benefits that come from that investment as well. And that's why we see investors today investing in this area, or making it a key part of their investment decisions, because they know that actually these are the companies that will be more successful in the future. They will be around to reap the benefit in years to come as well.
Yes, B, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I love the points that Mike just made, and I think it used to be maybe like 15 years ago that it was hard. Basically, 1 out of 10 employees, about 10% of employees would say, I'm looking to change my job because my company doesn't really stand for anything in the world. Like, I get to the end of my work week and I'm like, did anything I do matter in the bigger picture of things? So that number is now well over a third, and I think it's higher because the big research studies haven't really been done since COVID. But we know, like from Edelman, Edelman just did a study on what's causing the big resignation, and there's 3 drivers of the big resignation. One of them is lifestyle, so it's like I can't stand the commute, right? The second one is career advancement and pay. And so that's like, I've tried to get this promotion 3 times. You didn't give it to me. See ya. I'm out of here. Right. The third is meaning, purpose and meaning. And the Edelman research, this is global research, finds that the third is the number one reason. And they're not close. I'm not going to quote the numbers because I don't remember them, but I can put the link to the study, but they're not close. It's way ahead. It's the number one reason. So I think that, and there's similar data that you can find for customers, not just employees. There's similar data, Michael referred to this, for investors as well. So I think that we've entered this. We're just entering this new phase, I think, of it's not enough to not do damage. You have to be part of the solution, because people are basically saying, I don't want to be part of something that is meaningless. I mean, and so, a book just came out by Paul Polman, former CEO of Unilever, took Unilever from like being a good company to like a ridiculously profitable growth, all of that. And Andrew Winston, who's a CSR expert, and it's not called net zero. It's not, the book is not called, just don't do any damage. It's called net positive. And so, like, I think that, like, Mike is just spot on with this, with the comments he just made, and like looking to tomorrow. Yeah, and the research backs it. I guess it's like all the research backs it. Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's okay. I was going to say, I mean, I think obviously the research backs it. And I think the thing that, really strikes me, there's a couple things from what you've said so far. And, a couple points. Investors. I talk to investors all the time about companies, and, in healthcare, we're in the healthcare business. People are usually looking to, like what unmet need is this solving? And, how does it do that? And increasingly people have been focusing on the patient-centered aspect of this, that, it's not just about technology, it's about improving their lives. It's about improving the caregivers, the safety for the workers, and all these things, and physician burnout, and how can we, we don't want to burden people more. We want to make it better for them. And I'm starting to hear people say things like, we want to delight people, like you would hear from the consumer industry infused into healthcare. But I'm hearing investors also saying, they're looking for, not just for companies that are focused on health as they are, but also they're looking for people who do have the corporate social responsibility component infused into their culture. What is the culture of this company like? Are they thinking this way? Because that makes for a better world and for happier people. So, all these benefits, just like DE&I, having a diverse workforce, the data backs up that, a diverse workforce, makes for a better company. It's not just about, oh, my investors want me to have diversity and I need to go do that. Maybe in the short term, it kind of is, because we were like, oh, that's going to help us if we go for some diversity, but it's, or we're going to add a CSR kind of a mission or an ESG mission to our company, and that'll help us with our investors. Maybe it will, but that's not what this is about, right? As you said, this is about just making your company better, making your mission better, making the world a better place. Everyone's going to be happy. It reaps benefits up and down that value chain. So thanks for kind of setting the general stakes here. I want to ask Mike one more question. In terms of Jabil, Again, you talked about having like, an impact on a community. You've got a lot of workers at a factory and, in a facility. So, individually, do you measure like at Jabil, like do employees care about ESG? Like, do you survey them? And, how do you kind of measure that? I'm curious. And then even externally, what about other stakeholders? Do customers come to you and say, or clients come to you and say, hey, how are we going to be, either are you helping them think about these things, or are they coming to you saying, hey, we want to be sustainable, recoverable, and so on?
If I can actually start by setting out how we decide actually what is important to us. We about 6 months ago we completed the materiality assessment, and what that really says is I'm talking to customers. What's important to you, not just for today, but also in the future. Talk to our employees, to our leaders, to our suppliers, to the community leaders around the world as well. And then we looked at that information. And what was really good was that we saw a lot of commonality. So many companies want us to do similar sort of things. Our employees want us also to do things in terms of this overall CSR sustainability agenda as well. And from that, we could develop the right strategy moving forwards. And that strategy resonates because it came from those people. So our employees are really enthused about helping us succeed in these areas, whether it's in environmental issues, in social issues, volunteering. That's one of our KPIs, is to encourage more volunteering. They really are pleased that we're allowing them to do that. And that creates the community links, which brings people back into Jabil as well, because they hear that we're a nice company. They want to work for us. And it sort of loops back. But to your point about customers, I'm having regular discussions, and I've had about 3 this week already, with customers who want to work with us on these issues. They're medical customers who want to see if we can design for sustainability. Can we take their products and make them more sustainable in terms of materials that go into it, in terms of bringing them back to reuse? We have a very big pharma customer that we supply diagnostic instruments to. These have titanium in, quite valuable pieces of kit. They get chucked out of the hospital because they're contaminated with blood at the end of surgery. We said, actually, that doesn't seem very good. We can take them back. We clean them up. We put new electronics on it. We send it back again. They reuse it. And is this just an altruistic thing? No, it isn't actually. Now, we get better margins from that than a lot of our other business. It's good for business. It's good for the broader sustainability area as well.
Excellent. Good. No, those are good. Those are good examples. Now, you mentioned a materiality assessment. B or Mike, will you tell us what that is?
Oh, B, do you want to? Because you.
Sure. It's so if you do nothing else, do what Michael just talked about. So do the materiality assessment. Now, Jabil is a big company. They have lots of resources. You might not be there. And plus, basically, you have other things, maybe bigger things to worry about. So you can do it very simply, but basically a materiality analysis is looking at what is material or pertinent to the success of your business amongst all the societal issues out there. So for Jabil, because they're manufacturing, the life cycle of the product is hugely material. So the environment is material because of the supply chains. Most of the carbon footprint of the world comes from the supply chains or capitalism. So this is actually kind of a good thing because it's overwhelming to look at all of CSR, but you don't have to look at all of CSR. You just need to look at what's pertinent or material to you. Now, having said that, when you go do this, you're going to discover, and if not, email me and let me know I was wrong, but you're probably going to discover that there are 2, no matter what business you're in, and I know that most of you are in healthcare, so nevertheless, there are 2 that are going to come up and be material because they're material to everybody. And again, they are the environment and diversity, equity, and inclusion, because now everybody cares about that. It's kind of like worker safety now. But you're going to have some that are more pertinent to you. So like if like let's say your product is about increasing the efficiency of sharing lab reports or something, like a material issue to you might be like, I don't know, false positives or false negatives, or you will have some that are very pertinent to you. And I'll put a link in the chat to a link to like a very simple materiality analysis, because what Mike just explained is like it's the place to start, but you can do one literally within a few hours with just a few stakeholders, and that's a good place to start.
Okay, great. And by the way, I know that when we talk about these things, that these are important, both to the people who are working in your companies, but also to your external stakeholders, investors, customers, and so on. One of the things that you mentioned, I think, in the book was it doesn't take a lot of time. I don't remember the stat exactly, B, but it doesn't take a lot of time to infuse, kind of this sense of purpose into someone's job, or make someone's job better or feel more satisfying. It was like a small amount of time, right? Or a small percentage. Do you remember the stat that I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah. So there's been lots of studies done with 5 minutes of effort, like academic studies, and that's enough. But and even more relevant to this audience, the healthcare audience, is a book than that stat. Is a book comes from a book called Compassionomics.
Okay.
And just the title alone shows that Michael is right by what he just said about the soul of the business and all that. So
yeah,
Compassionomics. Are you familiar with it? Yeah. So
no, I'm not. No.
It's a study done at a hospital. And it's so two authors. One is like nerdy, research economist. The other's the healthcare practitioner. He's a physician of some sort. And what they started looking at was what happens to like the business metrics if we start caring, like if we start having a soul around our patients. And because of course that's going to be really costly, right? Like if you start doing that. Well, I don't want to ruin the punchline of the book, but it's a very good business decision. And one of the stats that they measured how long it took, like how much effort it took for these healthcare practitioners to do something, in this case for patients, that gave them a sense of purpose and meaning, and that were actually did something for the patient. And it's less than 60 seconds. So this is kind of a longer discussion, but the one thing to know is that we humans, we are so hardwired back to the African savannah, otherwise we would have not survived, to help each other. We are so exquisitely sensitive to acts of caring that very small acts have a huge impact on us. So when you think about like corporate social responsibility, like that's really like at its essence what it is just making meaningful, caring contributions to people out there, even if they're distant or whatever. So actually, I'm going to one more nerdy reference. So this comes from the University of Chicago. John List, he's an economist. If you're familiar with economics department, University of Chicago is very straight-laced. Like they're not really into CSR at all. Historically have not been, but anyway, University of Chicago, they did this study, and I want to tell your audience this in particular because they shared with one set of employees, very well designed study. One set of employees what the CSR was that the company was doing, and then another didn't know this. This is one paragraph of information. Those that got the information were 24% faster. They were like their productivity was 24% higher. They slacked off less, and the quality of the work was the same. Now, this is all subconscious. They didn't say, oh, you know, I'm working harder here at Jabil because Jabil does this amazing thing around packaging, or, you know, that it's all subconscious, but it's there. So if you work in healthcare, you have an advantage because you're already about improving people's health. But I think, Paul, what you said is totally backed by the research, in that if you don't, you know, if that purpose isn't, if that paragraph isn't explicit, if that isn't what you say you're about, like that human-centered contribution, you are foregoing all these benefits. Like if you just get hung up on, like, you know, margins or entering new markets, and that's what you make it all about, you're going to forego like the power of this.
Yeah. If I can just add, Paul,
please.
It's a very interesting analysis, and I think there's been a lot of work done in this area. But just if you look at employees, and particularly if you're in a startup, it's very easy, actually, I think, to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week almost, and forget actually about your own well-being and health. The evidence is, and we've also demonstrated this in Jabil, is that if we encourage people actually to take mini breaks, 5 minutes or so, a few times during the day, the operational guys will say, "Oh, that adds up to 20,000 people, half an hour a day extra. I've got to pay them for doing nothing." The reality is that performance goes up. Those people who take those breaks, they perform better. And that actually, it's a small investment to get a much bigger return from. And we know that actually this purpose, or making people feel as if you care for them, makes them actually perform better. It's a good win-win.
Yeah, no, I've heard that before. I've heard versions of those studies, and I've seen it. And now we're a lot of us are working at home, and so there's a different type of mass effect maybe happening, where people are going out and walking their dog, and they wouldn't have done that until the evening, and they're taking a break to be with their family members, whatever it might be. They're getting to go to that game they maybe have missed before. So I think all those things. Everyone I've talked to has said, I'm more productive. I'm working hard. I'm working just as hard, maybe even harder, in terms of the overall work I'm doing. But I'm way more productive having kind of this environment where I can take breaks and not feel the pressure of someone's looking over my shoulder and staring at me. I'm still getting my work done, but all of a sudden now I'm doing it on my own terms, and I'm getting everything done, but I'm doing it in a different way. I know it's reaping benefits all over the place. And that's why the great resignation that you referenced earlier before B is accelerating, and people are quitting their jobs left and right, even in companies that are doing good, even in companies that I'm saying fundamentally as a, healthcare companies. You mentioned a hospital earlier. You'd think a hospital's entire mission is to, cure people and make them healthy. And yet we hear all the time about all the inefficiencies and all the things that are that's why hospitals now have those, HCAHPS, and have other, measures of patient satisfaction scores, and making sure that they are delivering good care. And it's not, part of it's for competitive reasons and wanting business, but ultimately it's how they're reviewed. They show up in U.S. News and World Reports, and they're reviewed by people, saying, I didn't have a good experience at that institution, or this one is fantastic. So anyways, all these things are so important. And even if it's counterintuitive to think that healthcare companies aren't just by default doing good, there's so much more that can be done. Yeah, B.
Yeah, so I think that we should be clear that you can have an enterprise that on paper, it's founders or whatever, it has a soul, right? So you're in healthcare, and yet its existence in the world is soulless, and so you have to nurture that soul. You have to you have to have those conversations that Michael had, like what's important, what are we going to do around it. It's not just enough to say, and we know this because big pharma is one of the I mean, big pharma is all about cures and making people healthy and, you know, restoring their health after surgery, illness, whatever. And they're one of the least trusted industries out there, right? So we know that's possible. It's also very possible that you can have an enterprise that just doesn't really seem to be contributing all that much. Let's say it's a soap company, like really, like, you know, Dove soap, but it can have a soul, and you can nurture the soul. And if you question this, just go online, put Dove campaign for self-esteem, and you will see that what Dove has done is, you know, they haven't used the supermodels in their commercials. They've used women of all shapes and sizes. You know, speaking of DEI, they have all these programs to help girls combat all the issues that advertisement creates in girls' self-esteem. And so they have programs that have trained. So it's, you know, whatever business you're in, you can find this path that, you know, that like, you know, Michael's doing at Jabil, that, you know, has a soul, that has ESG and is socially responsible. So I just wanted to just explicitly say that, so that everybody feels like, yeah, there's a path for me here.
Great. No, thank you for that. All right, so let's cover a couple more things here quickly. So we talked before about that materiality analysis. So, you know, when I think about entrepreneurs who we're working with, they've got so much on their plate. They're really focused on something that's, you know, probably mainly near term that they got to get done, or they're worried about that next investment round, whatever. Where do people start? Is it the materiality analysis? Is that where they begin? You know, how does someone who's, you know, overburdened already with everything that's going on, how do they make, you know, room for, you know, for this? And what, you know, specifically, where should they start? What should they focus on in their ESG and DEI journey?
I think if I could start there, it's not doing anything, you know, complex or formal. I think it's just having an open mind, you know, about potential, you know, future things as well. And, you know, even in Jabil, we have entrepreneurs. We have, you know, these really, you know, great, you know, technical engineers, scientists, and other things developing stuff. And what we're saying to them is, you need to, you know, start right at the start, just thinking about what is, I wouldn't say the purpose of it, because they know what that is, but how will it be used? Will it end up in a waste tip somewhere at the end? What are wherever the materials come on, you know, for that? Is it all unrecycled plastic, or is it, you know, reusable plastic, or something like that? Because we want them to start right at the start, because otherwise they will get to the end and deliver something where our customers say, yeah, but what about these things that you haven't thought about? And it's a whole year or two of process lost because they haven't built it in. On the other side, if they build it in at the start, that gives us an advantage potentially with customers, because we have an extra value that we can sell to the customer as well at the same time.
Makes a lot of sense. And B, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I like the way Mike expressed that I think, I mean, if all you do is that you consider this in every business decision, so you know, am I making sure it doesn't aggravate a societal issue out there? You know, am I sending it with, you know, styrofoam, okay, or not, like that sort of thing. And then the second part is, you know, is there a way to do whatever we're doing right now that can help with an issue that it's close to? So, you know, if it's a surf shop, for example, and they're creating surfboards, a material issue to them, of course, is the cleanliness of the ocean. And well, a surf designer, there is a surf designer out there who, looking at the second one, right? Because it's like the second issue, said, well, what if I put sensors in the fin, and these sensors send information to scientists who are combating, the decline of our oceans? So, can you do something positive? So I think if you just infuse the organization with that sort of thinking that Michael's talking about, I think that, frankly, that's the best thing you can do, because that's the most organic. I think in terms of like if someone is early on, actually at any stage, but one of you mentioned, like, I think Michael did, if you start early, it's easier. And if what I would suggest to someone who's like excited about that peak and going, how do I do this early, is just start following B Corps. So just bcorps.org, because they're all about creating businesses that follow these principles that we're talking about. And you might want to actually use their framework as your business develops. So yeah, that would be kind of my thought on that.
And how do you spell bcorps.org?
It's just the letter B and then CORPS.
.org. Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, I do want to make sure that's correct. Actually, let me just.
Yeah, that's probably right. I'll let you look it up. Okay, that's great. So you start off with, and you can start off small too, right? I think that's also, as you said, Mike. It's not about doing some huge, project and effort and all that. You can start small. One thing I'm curious about is for an organization, small company at the early stages, what happens if they ignore ESG and DEI? What if they say, hey, we're going to push this, kick this can down the road. We'll think of this stuff later. What are some of the things that can happen to the organization in terms of, even a startup, in terms of attracting talent, investment? What do you see as being some of the downstream impacts of this?
Yeah, I think that that's a very important question, because if you are right at the start of this, do you ignore what's going to happen in 2 years' time? You don't, actually, because you're thinking about your product, how you get to market with it, and everything else. And if you're thinking about that, you should have the capability also to say, are there some other things that could derail this in the future? And I think there are two things, which are really the things that Bea said earlier on. First of all, you'll miss a trick or two, because you won't be able to design back in the same time what you should have done, perhaps, if you thought about it in a different way to start off with. So, the example I gave of where we actually reuse these medical devices, it's because we designed them also in a way that allows them to go through, because if we design them in a different way, that wouldn't be possible. And so we think about that right from the start when we design it. But the other thing is also, at the first round of investment, you may actually have investors who are smaller but less interested. But as you get and need more investment to grow the business, the investors themselves may be making some choices as well. And if they choose one business over another, what will be the distinguishing factor? Of course, the success of the business is tied also with regulatory success and other things as well, but also this sustainability dimension as well. So we know that the amount of money that is going into investments now away from less environmentally friendly things, such as carbon generation and those sort of things, to more sustainable ones, is significantly increasing. And we know in Jabil that we can get money cheaper because of our sustainability agenda. We can, and that means that we actually get a return on some of the investments we're making as well.
And let me jump over to you again for a second, B. So in terms of the big picture, you mentioned organizations like Unilever before, but what are some of the large corporations out there saying and doing, or large investors, that are kind of evidence of the trends and the things we're talking about here?
Well, Unilever is So they're a great example because they have they're a good case study because they have hundreds of brands, right? So they started doing this brand by brand. Dove was one of the first. They know that the brands that where they have moved forward with CSR are growing 50% faster than their other brands. So this is like the perfect experimental design. But yeah, there's we should say there's a spectrum here. It's like one of my clients is HP, and they've been way out front on environmentalism, and they don't have a stellar stock performance over the last 20 years, but you could and people have made the point, like if they didn't have that, then they might not be in existence. Like that's how much it helped them to be ahead, along the lines of what Michael was talking about. I think, like, if you don't do this, you're gonna forego like a whole bunch of benefits, like the 24% higher productivity, 50 to 300% higher retention in employees. I love the cheaper capital, again, growth rates that are, you're going to forego the 200% higher. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a more difficult path to success if you ignore all this, but you might still get there, and we can probably all think of brands that are there. But I also think it will, because I work with one firm right now that, they just did their IPO, actually right before the pandemic hit. And they are now kind of going like, oh my God, I could have had a V8, because what's happening is if they had thought of these things earlier, they wouldn't be scrambling right now to, for example, put 2 women on their board because they operate in California. So this edge that is becoming mainstream, there's also a regulatory end to it. So environment and DEI, these are becoming requirements around the world. So they're kind of now having to reverse engineer their way to compliance. So there's some real like hard, solid obstacles that are going to be in your way if you don't look at tomorrow the way, along these lines.
Yeah, and you mentioned, we talked about talent as well, and this idea again of the Great Resignation. It's happening everywhere, and it's not just. There's obviously lots of contributing factors, but there's no question there's a movement, if you want to call it that, to for people just to change, where they're working and how they're working, and again, even an organization that by default sounds like it's doing good, there's so many things you can do to make that more impactful, to make it, that work more satisfying. I thought it was really interesting in your book. You talked about some of the research that shows that higher pay isn't the motivator, and that for years people thought it was higher pay that was the motivator. And when someone comes in to resign, like you did, I think in one of your jobs, they offer you higher pay as the way to retain somebody. And I guess the data doesn't back up that works, right? It may happen occasionally, but it's usually not the money that the reason that someone's leaving. It's they're overworked, they're unsatisfied, whatever it is, right? Am I giving that analysis correctly, B?
Yeah, there's some subtleties to it. So if you offer more pay, they might say yes, because our conscious and our subconscious operate differently. But then you're going to find that you give them the higher pay and they leave 4 months later anyway. So it doesn't work, even though you might think it works if you're an HR director and you did that, unless you look at the follow-up. So yeah, it's been established over and over and over again. It doesn't work. In fact, some studies find that it actually gets in the way because our brains are single processors. So if we're thinking about pay, then we're forgetting that we're working at a company that is, reducing hospitalization time by 60%. So in some cases, it actually makes things worse, because if that's the conversation you're always having with your team is around pay, again, we're single processors most of the time. You're not having the conversation of like, wow, you're part of this effort that is going to allow people to be home more than they are at the hospital. And so yes, that's exactly what the research shows.
Really, really, really interesting. I want to just talk about one other topic over here too, which is, again, within an organization, Mike, let me come back to you on this. There's, as a medical technology company, again, you have to make choices about how you manufacture. There's huge supply chain issues that are out there right now in the world that people are reacting to. And I've heard people from Jabil and other places say like, hey, tear apart an iPhone and or something else, and make sure you're trying to include components that you see in those devices, because we know they're going to be available and we know we can get them. And the question I have for you is, whether it's at Jabil or other organizations, are people choosing vendors? Are they choosing suppliers and vendors and other things based on sustainability now? Is that a driving component in this as well? And if they're not, should they be?
I think it's something that is beginning to become more the norm. Europe, I think, was a little bit ahead, and European companies have been making those sort of decisions for the last 5 years or so. It's not just that, but if it's a distinguishing factor, if everything else is the same, then they'll go for the company that performs better in this area. But I also see it the reverse. It's an opportunity. So you create the opportunities through it. So it's not necessary that it's immediately evident that is what a reason why they'll come to you as a customer. But it may be that actually you maintain that customer better terms than before because of it. So you create a better partnership. And I think that's what we're increasingly finding, is that this is not. It used to be a transactional stuff. Now it's a partnership, collaboration. How do we keep this going for longer? Because we can both see improvements in the way that we can do things by having this mentality and mindset that we're creating.
Yeah, and B, anything you want to chime in on that topic at all?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would chime in is just ask your business partners. I'm not going to say which brand this was, but I worked with a company that plays a role in supply chains, and they hired me, after one of the senior leaders read my book, and I asked them that question, like, are your customers asking you to be more, socially responsible? And they said no. But this is pretty recent. This is like in the last 8 months. And I looked at their customers, and Unilever's one of their customers. So I was like, that's incredible. So anyway, so I said, who's the Unilever rep? And can I speak to them? Of course, they had like 8 because Unilever's huge. But I talked to several of them, and they said, no, actually, yeah, they haven't asked for that. They haven't asked. And I said, can you ask them why they haven't? And so they did. And they called the Unilever rep, and they said, hey, you guys are really socially responsible, and you guys haven't asked us to help us with this. And they said, oh my God, we are so glad you brought this up, because we internally, we've been thinking about this. Like, you guys don't have your eye on this ball. It's really exhausting to just keep bringing our business partners up to where we are. And frankly, we were looking at your competitors. So anyway, needless to say, my contract got renewed because at the leadership level, they were like, whoa, this is actually, it might be more important than we ever imagined it was. So have the conversation. If you don't see the signs, like, just ask.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So, and a great story to be able to tell. So we only have 5 minutes left of the public broadcast. And then we have our Q&A, our private Q&A with the MedTech Innovator companies. And some of our biotools innovator companies are here too. So let's just take these last 4 or 5 minutes to talk about a couple of things. If there's anything, let's start off with kind of just generally speaking, again, B, you've got this book, Doing Good at Work. And that's something that I know, or Do Good at Work, Do Good at Work is the title. You got this book, I encourage people, first of all, to read it. And again, I'm just telling you, what I've read so far has been really eye-opening for me. So I'm encouraging others to find it and read it. If there's one fact you could have an entrepreneur who's listening to this take away, I'll start with you, B. What would it be? What's that one fact? You can throw in 2 if you need to.
Okay, so if you look at 2 paths, right? So the one path is like the business with a soul that cares about not doing damage and helping with issues that are close to it, and the other isn't. Those involved in A are 24% less likely to die in any given year. So that's how important this is to us as humans, this bigger, broader thinking of tomorrow. So yes, so that's how the dots connect to actually our own well-being. So as an entrepreneur, if you, and it's not that, you might die if you don't do this. It's that is such a marker of health for you people, right? That it's such a marker of wellness and health that your mortality goes down, that I thought that one would resonate. So.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I remember hearing that in your book as well when I was listening to it, how much data there is around wellness and people who have purpose in their work. And how much healthier they are, and they're lowering blood pressure and all those other things that you talked about in the book. So that's really great. Thank you for sharing that stat. Again, there's a lot more in the book. So and I'm only partially way through it. So I highly recommend people take a look at that, and also reach out to you. And what's the name of your company? I mean, how do people find you as well, B?
Yeah, I think the best URL is the name of the book. So it's dogoodatwork.com. is and
easiest way to find you.
Welcome any conversation, send me emails, if I mention something that you're scrambling around on Google for and you can't find because I gave you the wrong URL, it's actually bcorporation.net, by the way. For example, just contact me. I'd be happy to help you find your way.
Thanks, B, for sharing that. All right, and over to you, Michael. So again, if there's something out there that you think someone's listening needs to have as a takeaway, what would that be? And then how do people follow up with you if they want to get in touch with you as well?
I think it's follow the money, because there is so much investment going into more sustainable solutions in terms of the end point. That if you don't do this, you'd be missing out in any case, or where that trend is going. So follow the money is my advice. In terms of contacting me, you can get through Jabil. You can use our contact people at Jabil, and you can get through to me, and I'll be very happy to talk more about these things.
All right, and are you on LinkedIn too? If people want to look you up,
I am indeed. Yes, Michael Cook with an E on the end. You'll find me there as well. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We barely scratched the surface in this hour on these topics, and that makes a lot of sense because there's so much to talk about here. We could certainly do hours and hours more on diversity, equity, and inclusion and how to implement that in an organization. So we'll talk about those things, I'm sure, in future conversations. But I really appreciate all of the ideas and context you've given us for ESG and for DEI. Or CSR, or whatever acronym you want to use, but again, you've opened my eyes. I know you've put some really interesting concepts out there. We'll get into some private Q&A with our companies in a minute, But I really want to start finish by saying thank you again to both of you, B and Mike, for being here and for sharing some of your thoughts. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right. So for those of you on YouTube, that's the end of our hour. You can find the archives of all of our MedTech Innovator Live broadcasts at medtechinnovator.org/live. It's pretty easy. So go there. You'll see this as well as other recordings of all of our past discussions. This is webinar number 12 in this season. So you got a lot to look back at, really interesting topics, other ones coming up as well. Also, you can look back at past years. We have speakers from past years archived as well. So please, I encourage you to go do that. Subscribe if you want to hear more on our YouTube channel, or right on the website, there's a form you can fill in to get notifications in the future. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see all of you on YouTube sometime, hopefully, again, very soon. So thanks for joining us today.